All right, everyone's eyes are glued to the Persian Gulf, watching the missiles fly in Operation Epic Fury. It's all over the news, but they're completely missing the real story. And that story isn't about oil, it's about what we all eat.
Exactly. The real war, the one with potentially catastrophic consequences for everyone, isn't being fought over oil tankers or air superiority. No, it's being fought over fertilizer. And the fallout from this could be far, far more devastating than any single military strike.
So, we need to look past the military conflict, because what it's really unleashed is a hidden economic war, a war on the invisible systems that feed the entire planet. To really get what's at stake here, you have to understand a concept we're calling the nitrogen fortress.
Right, because the Persian Gulf isn't just an energy hub, it's the world's primary factory for the synthetic nutrients that modern agriculture absolutely depends on. And why there? Well, it all comes down to their massive reserves of cheap natural gas. That gas is the key ingredient, the absolute foundation for producing nitrogen fertilizer.
And this is its Achilles heel. The Strait of Hormuz. It's a tiny, 21-mile-wide exit valve for that entire nitrogen fortress. And now, that valve has been slammed shut. It's effectively severed one of the main arteries of the global food system.
And the scale of this paralysis is just staggering when you look at the numbers. We are talking about up to half of the world's seaborne elemental sulfur, which you need for phosphate fertilizers, just trapped. Over a third of all traded urea, stuck. This isn't some minor leak, it's like a dam just broke in the global food supply chain.
And this chart here, this really drives home the specific problem for urea, which is the planet's most common nitrogen fertilizer. You just add up the high-risk and at-risk countries, and suddenly you see it. Nearly half of the entire global export market is effectively being held hostage by this one regional conflict. It's a massive vulnerability.
And this is the part that is it's a shocking, almost unbelievable oversight in the system. I mean, think about it. We have strategic petroleum reserves, right? We stockpile hundreds of millions of barrels of oil for a crisis exactly like this one. But a strategic fertilizer reserve? It doesn't exist. It's not a thing. The entire global food system runs on a fragile, just-in-time delivery model, and the time just ran out.
So what you have to understand is this isn't just a simple supply shock. It's much more dangerous. It's a devastating economic pincer movement. The first blow is the physical blockade at Hormuz. The second blow, hitting at the exact same time, is the spike in global energy prices, which absolutely crushes the economics for any producer outside the Gulf.
And this quote from the IEA really explains why that second blow, that energy spike, is so devastating. Making nitrogen fertilizer is incredibly energy-intensive. Natural gas isn't just the fuel you burn to run the factory. For the most common production method, it's the primary ingredient. So when gas prices go through the roof, the cost of making fertilizer becomes completely untenable.
And boy, did they go through the roof. When those retaliatory strikes hit Qatari LNG facilities, the benchmark European gas price spiked 51%, instantly. That single event made fertilizer production across Europe prohibitively expensive, almost overnight. It just tightened that global supply noose even further.
So what's the result for the farmers on the ground? A brutal price shock. The price of urea exploded by over 25%, hitting $625 a ton. And that's not just some abstract market number. That is a direct hit to the bottom line of every single farm that relies on these nutrients to grow the world's food.
Okay, so we've talked about the economics, the supply chains, but how does this crisis actually translate into human suffering? Let's take a look at what we're calling the global heat map of pain. This table gives you a quick, sobering snapshot. For a major nation like India, it's a massive fiscal and political stress test. For an agricultural powerhouse like Brazil, it's a huge risk to their entire export economy. But for countries like Sudan and Nigeria, which are already on the brink, this supply shock is a powerful accelerant towards absolute catastrophe.
Let's just zero in on India for a second. They are the world's biggest urea importer from the Gulf, and they are heading right into their critical Kharif planting season. This is the main summer growing season that feeds hundreds of millions of people. This crisis doesn't just threaten their harvest, it threatens to blow a massive hole in their national budget because of soaring subsidy costs.
Now let's look at Brazil, the world's soybean superpower. For them, this crisis acts like a logistical war tax. All of a sudden, the cost of every single input is skyrocketing. It's squeezing farmer margins and seriously threatening the competitiveness of their crucial exports on the world stage.
And this is where we see the most severe human cost. In places like Sudan, already torn apart by civil war, this isn't about economics anymore. This is about survival. This fertilizer shock is what's known as a threat multiplier. It could push millions of people from a state of emergency, Phase 4, into IPC Phase 5, outright famine.
So as this human cost is mounting, a very different and much colder calculation is happening on Wall Street and in other financial centers. So let's shift gears and look at this crisis through the lens of the financial markets. What's the variant perception here?
Well, the market has drawn a very, very clear line in the sand. On one side, you have the winners. Let's call them geopolitical hedges. These are the producers who are insulated from the crisis because they have their own cheap, secure energy. On the other side, the losers, the middlemen, the companies totally exposed to the chaos of global logistics and dependent on massive crop volumes that might not exist anymore.
And the winners became obvious almost immediately. Look at CF Industries. Their stock jumped more than 10%. Why? Simple. They use cheap North American shale gas, which gives them this huge structural advantage right now. And then you have Nutrien with its vast production in Canada. It is perfectly positioned to capture all the market share that the Gulf producers just had to abandon. And the losers? Well, you've got the global grain traders like ADM and Bunge. They face the grim prospect of lower harvests, which means lower volumes to process and ship. And then if you go even further down the supply chain, you hit protein producers like Tyson Foods. They're facing a dire outlook because the cost of animal feed, which is made from corn and soy, is absolutely set to explode.
But crisis often forces innovation. It's a catalyst. So the critical long-term takeaway from this event is the violent acceleration of what you could call the Great Decoupling, a global push towards agricultural independence from these volatile geopolitical choke points.
And this is really where the long-term solution lies. It's in these ag tech companies that offer a way to bypass these geopolitical risks entirely. Think of Pivot Bio. They have microbes that can pull nitrogen directly from the air, which drastically cuts the need for synthetic fertilizers. Or a company like Inari, which is using gene editing to design crops that are just more efficient, that thrive with less fertilizer in the first place. This crisis makes their technology not just innovative, but absolutely essential. So we're left with this really powerful question. We've just seen how a tiny 21-mile stretch of water can hold the entire global food supply hostage. But in doing so, has this crisis also just lit a fire under the technological revolution that will ultimately secure our food supply for good? That's the real question going forward.